Hi everyone, this is a GUAC weekly maintenance meeting. This is being recorded and will be published online. Participation in the meeting is also in accordance with our antitrust policies as well as open SSF code of conduct. Usually this meeting is a way for us to get together and now with the extended community to discuss supply chain metadata problem. Feel free to add agenda items that you would like to talk about. I think our agenda will be mostly today about talking through kind of the open questions around the Trustify project movement, and also I think I personally want to hear a little bit more about what was happening in Europe over the past eventful weeks. But before that, we have a section here where we feel free to introduce yourself. It looks like we have quite a few new faces here. So if you would like to introduce yourself, please feel free to unmute, raise your hand, however you want to do it.
So I guess Ruben and Jens were here before. Maybe Pavel or Rojan, if you want to give a quick introduction.
Yeah. Hello. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Hello, I'm Pavel. I work in Red Hat as quality engineer on Trustify and related parts. So that's my interest in GUAC parts, right? That especially on the testing side of Trustify and related things. Yeah. And so sorry, this is first time for me using Zoom, so I'm actually not sure how to properly use the application. Sorry.
I will go next. So, hi everyone. My name is Rajan. I am from India, and I am a software quality engineer at Red Hat as well, and I am being part of Trustify team. So, I work with Pavel, Deon, almost everyone, Jens and Ruben as well. So, that's all.
Awesome. I hope it's not. Oh, it is late for you.
Good, good. I won't complain.
Awesome. So yeah, since you mentioned that, let's talk about that first, and then maybe we can go through a little bit about the open what happened at Open SSF Day later.
Cool. So what have I been doing last week is moving repos. I didn't move everything, and I won't do that, even if we said we're going to do it. But the more I'm going through this, it doesn't make sense to like it's time for us to clean our house. So to move only things that we are actively working on. So I started with moving the main repos, Trustify and Trustify UI. I think most of that is working now. So people are raising PRs, merging things, pushing. So all is good. What we still didn't do, because Jens was on a PTO last week, we have a couple of bots that require some of the developer accounts for us, and that's another topic that I'll come about later. But most of the main repos are now being transferred there. I have couple of things. So let's get one by one. So the DCO app that GUAC organization is using for basically requiring the sign commits. It's active now. So we didn't use that on Trustify, but we tried to do something different, like trying to do a Git sign, but we didn't enforce it, right? So that was voluntarily so far. So I was thinking maybe going forward, what do people think? Like to me, these sign commits are doesn't when we last look at it, it didn't make too much sense because it doesn't throw anything. But basically using the Git sign and maybe trying to enforce that in the entire organization could be a good thing. What do people think?
When you say, I just want to clarify, because when you say signing, you mean like the key signing, or you mean like the sign off?
Yeah, Git signing basically puts the signature in the SIG store. It goes through all the SIG store kind of workflow for each commit. So yeah, it's more supply chain security kind of approach, and it's also like a more OpenSSF based approach.
So I do know we're using Git Tough in a few places. And so that's another sort of mechanism that's by the same folks who do Git sign. So it might be worthwhile to like pull in somebody like Aditya who works on sort of both of those and kind of maybe just explain sort of the pros and cons of each and what might make most sense for what we're trying to do.
Cool. So I don't know if Red Hat folks. I mean, DCO it creates a couple of issues with a few bots that basically do commits, but I think maybe we already fixed some of those already last week. But is it okay for you to have DCO or this sign bot failing the PRs until we figure out this on the organizational level?
Yeah, and also the DCO check more comes from OpenSSF. They don't necessarily require it completely, but they heavily encourage it because again, like different folks will say, oh, DCO isn't legally binding and yada yada, and then other lawyers are like, just be safe, better safe than sorry. And so the DCO check has more to do with the person who is committing signing off that they have authorization to contribute the code, as opposed to it being like so that if somebody were to get in trouble, like let's say I copy and paste something from, I don't know, like some other company's code, it wouldn't be on the GUAC project. It would be on me to deal with that because I was the one who signed off that it was my code. That's the intent of the DCO, which is a little different than the supply chain stuff that we're trying to talk about with like Git sign or Git tough.
Cool. So okay, we'll keep the DCO for now, and maybe we can start talking then about Git sign in the future if folks think that could be useful. Another thing, dependable is also automatically activated. We didn't use it before. So Jens, Ruben, do you think we should keep it or? Yeah, so we already had a couple of PRs raised by it last week, so that's good. Keeping the dependency up to date. That's all great. Cool. So the status so far. So so most of the things I have a couple of more utility repos to move. Something related to the scale testing and things like that. We'll get there. And then Ruben will get to the dependency analytics and try to go through your document and figure out how to do the upstream. We have a couple more repos that we discussed last week. So so this Ansible deployment and the OpenShift operator, they're basically the downstream stuff. So they are using downstream images and are called RHTPA. So the conclusion was it doesn't make sense to move them to the community until we get the upstream, basically, version of them. And I think it makes sense. So the Trustification organization is now owned by Linux Foundation. It's there. So my goal is let's keep it there until we figure out the upstream version that community is actually interested in, and then we will move that to the foundation and move the downstream stuff somewhere Red Hat specific, right? That makes sense. So my idea is to go through the remaining couple dozen repos. There's a lot of stuff that we don't use anymore. We will archive those, and yeah, leave a couple of those things that needs to be worked out in the meantime, and then just a few more things that can be moved to the community at the moment. So just have a clean slate. And then what I want to go is with the team. So I created one team with all the committers that we have, and they're now maintainers on all the projects. So we need to refine that and basically use the GUAC maintainers ladder kind of style of doing things, and like be more granular with the access rights with everything. But all in all, I think yeah, a lot of work has been done. Things are working. Everything is now all the main things are now in the GUAC and we are continue to do things. But one more topic that I have, the topic of these developer accounts. So we have a couple of bots that we are using. So Sorcery that we are now our metrics channel bot, and I think code cove coverage that needs some kind of developer account basically, right? So, and somebody to log in to get a token to set up that token for GitHub. So a lot of this stuff was on Jens. That's why they're not working still, because he was out for 2 weeks. And that prompted me that maybe we need to figure out a better way to manage these kind of secrets that we need for these kind of things. So I looked a little bit. We have like a enterprise Bitwarden account in Red Hat that we can use for this, but I'm not sure if this is like something that's community friendly, and how to set things up. So it's not it's not something that we need to figure out right now, but something to think about, like how like a one team within the project would do things like this, right? Manage so that when somebody goes on PTO or things like that, we can still do things. And yes, that's your domain.
Yeah, I just want to say, there's two variants, I'd say. One is the Sorcery AI and CodeCav, and those should be GitHub applications that you just add to the organization, and that should be it. It should be maintained by those applications. And to my understanding, those should be available to everyone who's on that organization. While the other one, the metrics, the chatbot, that's a different story. So that actually needs a token, or I think like a password for the bot to log into Matrix. That usually was stored using the GitHub organization secrets, I think it's called. So that you just put the secret in there, and then it can be used by all the repositories, or we can tie that to a certain repository, whatever makes sense. The question is, how do you acquire that secret in the first place? And that was in the case of Matrix, setting up that Matrix account. And the question is there, how can we share that? So yes, we may need to have like maybe an out of GitHub approach on sharing that. But ultimately, it should end up in the GitHub secrets.
Yes, but that's the thing I had. I mean, it was once in a couple of years, I think, event to move things. So I think CodeConv token was moved because it was on a project level. But for example, Matrix one was on the GitHub organization and didn't move, and I didn't then want to like create a new bot or things like that. So like let's wait.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah, once they are in the GitHub, they're usable, but nobody can create a new one or similar one. Yeah, is it a problem? Is it not? I don't know. It showed up during the during the move, but
I
yeah,
think it is a
also-
problem. Absolutely, and we do need to fix it. But right now, just thinking about that, unless I miss something, I think the matrix bot should be the only one that has that problem. It needs fixing anyway, but still.
Yeah. Mike, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, so the only thing that I think I don't know if you've had the conversation with LF team about the metric stuff, because they're I think there might be some LF rules just on how those metrics are collected, because they kind of say, hey, if you're a project underneath the LF, we want to make sure that it's, you know, for example, all of those metrics are in some way made public to, you know, any member of the LF or whatever. So I don't know exactly what it is. I'm sure it's not going to be a big deal, but it's probably worth, if we haven't already talked to them about like the exact rules around that, we should make sure that we just sort of talk to LF about that.
So it's not metrics for the projects. It's a metrics chat basically. It's, the same as a Slack that we still use for our team chat.
Oh, okay. Never mind then.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay.
So it's just a bot that sends a message when there's a new PR and yeah, things like that. Notifications.
Oh, okay. Never mind then.
Okay.
Thanks.
No worries. But yeah, what do you think about Bitwarden or some organization level password manager? Does it make sense or not to think about it?
I mean, it sounds like it is a token for the tokens for the matrix server, the matrix token, right? Not the GitHub token that's sent to the matrix bot, or is it the other way around?
No, so it is basically you're creating a matrix user, and the matrix user then, I'm not sure if there's a token of its actually username and password that you have to provide to that command line tool, which then logs into matrix and sends that message. But ultimately, you need the username and password to generate a token if a token is being used. So whoever does that needs the username and password to that matrix account.
Gotcha. Like I'm not. So we also have, I think, a couple accounts around, like I think our YouTube brand account is linked to a bunch of direct users and stuff like that. But I think we have like one or two couple out of band accounts. I think if the overhead, and I think I heard like this probably only needs to happen like once a year or something. If the overhead is
even less, yeah.
Yeah. I think it's fine if we kind of I don't want to go like, you know, if we have Bitwarden, then we have to manage the Bitwarden subscription, and we figure out who pays for it and stuff like that. That's also a little bit of a headache. So
Also, one thing to kind of throw out there is I believe LF might have a subscription to one of these that we could just maybe also use, where like, again, it's one of those things where like the LF could have, you know, they would have at some level like the org level access, but could essentially give everybody who's a maintainer an account or whatever, and then we would still be able to share everything and whatever.
Yeah, and I would expect that there will be already some approach how such credentials should be handled, right, on the LF level, right? Because I don't think there's like a first account and first credentials ever, right? So maybe someone could know how it should be stored, especially about with Warden. I think that in our case it's tied to like employee accounts internally, so we cannot use that directly with to share with community like like a key store or something. So that really I think would need like extra subscription or something.
Yeah, as Ruben said, so maybe yeah, we have something like this for some cluster and resources and OpenShift. So maybe a private GitHub repo with secret. Yeah, let's just think about it, because yeah.
yeah.
I think we will be able to fix everything on our side. Yeah, quickly. Just think about for the next time.
Yeah,
If we
I
have,
remember back in CNCF we had a a Google Doc and we put everything in there.
yeah, as simple as possible.
Yeah.
It's always the solution, right? Cool.
Yeah.
So okay, let us chat offline about this and figure out what we have so far and where to put it so that everybody who has interest into that can access it. So GitHub docs or Bitwarden, and then we will share it with the rest of the maintainers.
Yeah, one thing I also like to mention is I think at some point also when we donated our project to OpenSSF, we also started trying to do a little bit more out in the main channel, which is, you know, so that people see like something's happening, right? I don't know what the velocity of the bot is, but it may not be maybe I don't know whether it's feasible to also have a Slack bot that also shows
Yeah.
that.
So we talked about it also last week, how we should approach this. Should we use again, keep things as simple as possible as far as we can. So maybe use the GUAC channel until if it gets too much noisy, then we can maybe, you know, create something else, some sub channel with, you know, these more notifications. But yeah, maybe we can add a bot to I think Peter had a bot that sends some messages to the internal Slack channel, so maybe we can redirect it to go to the GUAC and things like that. Well, I'll take a look at it, and yeah, encourage the team discussions to go in the public platform. Okay. So yeah, I think that's most of the things from my side. So a couple more things to actually like wrap up all this first phase. Everybody can work, and then I'll go further cleaning things up in the Trustify to like archive anything and just redirect people to the GUAC repos for everything that's interesting, and we can then start working on the maintainer letters and categories and things like that, and on the dependency analytics, which is its own kind of, how many, 6, 7 repositories.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Cool.
All right, so I guess this is the first meeting that we've had after OpenSSF because last week was a US holiday, so we canceled that as well. I guess Mike, you were there. Diana, were you there? Okay, yeah, I don't know who else was there. So any interesting conversations or happenings?
Yeah, I could talk a little bit about some stuff from my end, and I know I saw Dayon there for. I think I might have only seen you on OpenSSF Community Day, if I remember correctly. So yeah, there was a couple of things that I found pretty interesting. One was that what was I going to say? One was that the CRA, the Cyber Resilience Act in Europe, is still a pretty big thing. Folks are very sort of interested in that, and then I think that the way that sort of combines with the work in Trustify and in GUAC is interesting because, you know, a lot of folks are starting to ask the question of, hey, or rather they're needing to answer the question of what do my dependencies look like, and how do I make sure that I'm compliant with the CRA, and can I essentially not just build SBOMs, but have a good understanding of when something goes wrong, when there's a new vulnerability or whatever, like what are the issues that like I need to fix, and what's under my responsibility, which was an interesting was definitely sort of pretty interesting. I had a talk on that with some folks out there. So that was one big one from my perspective. Another thing is still SBOM related stuff. I think while we were there, CISA released the new minimum elements, which was obviously good thing. Or yeah, CISA did that. And there were a couple of other. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that kind of like shouts out to me. I think the CRA was by far the biggest sort of like thing folks were talking about. That's it for me. But Dayan, did you have other thoughts and things?
Yeah, I would agree. I think the CRA was the biggest topic. So from my point of view, it was a little bit more about organizational challenges and things like that than the new technical stuff from the previous year. Yeah, a couple of so I think the panel that people had. Let me send the links. It was really interesting. Having like what it's called, like a role play scenario going through the like responding to the security incident by different organizations involved into the software development and consuming. So I would recommend everybody to watch it. It was really nice. And what else was good? Like talking about, and I think OpenSSF is getting more interest into this going forward. It's artificial intelligence cyber challenge, talking about different teams trying to build AI solutions to basically answer a lot of questions about security of the softwares and things like that. So it can be something interesting for folks to take a look from the OpenSSF day. That was the main one that I was attending. Yeah.
Awesome. I feel I have a lot of questions on CRE, but they're not. That may be a different topic in itself. One thing that I wanted to ask about. So I've read the CISA document. I know Google is working on a response. We're working for a response internally. But I think likewise in previous CISA, it's RFC, right? So they're looking for comments. We've done the RFC as part of the GUAC community. I think one of the questions I have is there something we want to send in for this one on behalf of like OpenSSF and the GUAC community?
So does anybody have a link to that?
Oh yeah, let me.
Because I haven't looked into that.
So this is the. One second. This is the link to the RFC, and then the. It's really weird because like you have to go down to get the link. I think. I don't like the way they lay out this page. It's very easy to miss the actual document. Okay, and then this is the actual document. One second. Yeah.
So I can definitely forward this to a project folks in Red Hat and people that are actually producing and consuming SBOMs, and see if they have any comments.
Yeah, I wonder whether it's also like worded where I think we have some comments put together. Some of it is definitely more organizational focused. Some of them are more generic. I feel like it may be helpful also, for CISA to hear this from the open source community side as well. So maybe we can spend some time. I think the comments are due early October. So maybe during the next meeting or the following meeting, we can do a little bit of brainstorm. There's a lot of thumbs up.
Yeah, so maybe let's go through it and maybe discuss it. Yeah, next week.
All right, let's have that be the agenda for next week.
Homework for next week.
Awesome. I think I have a bunch of questions about CRA, but I'll probably watch Mike's talk before I ask questions.
So, I mean, I do think the things that are like, if I were to say like, what are the top things that are applicable to GUAC, not just Mike's ramblings, a GUAC and Trustify and everything that now falls under sort of this group. One is still like better SBOMs. I know we're not focused on the generation of SBOMs, but some folks are really starting to say how can I take an SBOM, combine it with my other stuff, enrich it, and generate a new SBOM, because that new SBOM might be going to the EU as a way of saying this whole complete transitive list of stuff. I want to be able to go and tell the EU that this is everything my application depends on, as opposed to saying, I don't know, like I depend on Cosign, the tool in this Docker image, and then just sort of say, great, I depend on Cosign and that's it, not including, what potentially Cosign depends on, yada, yada. That's maybe not the best example, but stuff like that is definitely one of the things there. The other thing is, I think for our group, just sort of with reference to the requirements of stewards under the CRA. So the Linux Foundation and therefore the OpenSSF are most likely what's going to be considered stewards, which is they don't have, again, it's if Kusari wants to sell a thing, we're on the hook for making sure it's safe. If Red Hat wants to sell a thing, they're on the hook for making sure it's safe, Google, etc. So there's nothing to say that the GUAC maintainers need to make sure that anything is what's super safe one way or the other, but the LF is trying to say, hey, as part of the life cycle of projects that fall under the LF, especially stuff like OpenSSF, there's going to be requirements around stuff like security baseline, which is one of the new projects underneath the OpenSSF, which Ben couldn't make it today, but Ben is one of the maintainers of that. I might still be a maintainer, but at the very least I'm a contributor to it. And there's stuff there that is going to be, hey, you need to do certain basic security things to prove to the LF and broader community that you're doing reasonable things. I think we're all going above and beyond what those requirements are. The only thing we might need to look at is, are we dotting our I's, crossing our T's thing, as in, are we making sure that we're following the letter of the law, even though we're following the spirit of the law, as far as that goes. And the reason for this is to essentially make it so that LF members, we can all kind of come together and say, hey, if I want to use an OpenSSF graduated project, let's say, I should have a certain level of, like, they're doing the right things, that it's a well-maintained project, that it's not something that was abandoned 6 months ago, right? That sort of thing. And yes, it's still up to me, the producer of some piece of some product, to make sure that like, if I want to go in and, let's say, sell GUAC, it's still up to me to keep track of the vulnerabilities that are in GUAC and whatever. But it shouldn't. But there should still be some level of baseline coming out of the LF where it doesn't just feel like I need to do all the investigation myself. I should be able to say, oh, this is an LF project that hits these things. Great. I know in the very least they have a security policy, and that they have to have at least X maintainers and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. I think one of the sticking points always comes when there's a vulnerability, right? In that case, is having a baseline, will that also include vulnerability response as well? Yeah.
Yeah, so the answer there is largely no, but the thing that they're asking for is, if you have a vulnerability response, make sure it's published. Like, make sure that you have, like, if your project has some sort of guidelines on how they respond to vulnerabilities, make sure they're documented.
Okay.
And so the only thing that you're just trying to say is, yeah, if you're telling the world, if you find a vulnerability in it, that's your problem. We don't accept CVEs. We don't do anything. That's all on you. Then I think your average person would say, oh, great, this is not a project that I would include as part of something that I might consider sensitive. That sort of thing is something that they're trying to say, because then it just makes it easier for consumers. Somebody comes out and says, hey, I want to build on top of GUAC, and the GUAC maintainers say, hey, we don't provide any level of security support. They might say, oh, should we fork GUAC? Should we look at another tool? That might be how they approach that that sort of
but there's
issue
no
there.
mandate on the open source project to do something in particular, right? It's just like,
yeah, in 99% of all cases, the answer is no. Like, there's no obligation. There's talk about how there might be a couple of special snowflakes, like the Linux kernel, where it's like, hey, the Linux kernel has enough folks who, like, I think they said that the numbers of billions of dollars that rely on Linux is if not trillions, is extraordinary. So that is potentially a special case of the EU is doing what it would need to do to make sure that the Linux kernel doesn't fall over. But I mean, I think that there is a relatively robust community of maintainers from, Microsoft, Google, Red Hat, and so on and so forth. The challenge is just going to be that at the same time, it's still up to the individual organizations to be responsible for what they're selling. Now, again, the thing there that they're trying to do, and this is also where Trustify and GUAC can help, is like the LF is trying to say, hey, what would it take for us to come together on larger projects like the Linux kernel, like Kubernetes, and say, why don't we try to build unified vulnerability response teams that are, staffed by staff of the maintainer, the companies that help maintain these projects, so that when something like a vulnerability in Kubernetes comes out, all the companies that are all sort of making money off of the products that they're selling on top of Kubernetes or through Kubernetes, stuff like, OpenShift or AKS, EKS, et cetera, can they go and essentially, like, everybody kind of, there's a war room, there's whatever, there's clearly a channel for everybody to do that. And then everybody can kind of create a unified approach to a thing. Now, the area where folks were talking about where Trustify, GUAC, et cetera, could help is, could we spin up, and this is something that's happening in the CNCF now with just pure GUAC, but I think Trustify is also something that we should look at as well, is, can we spin up a CNCF-wide or LF-wide, Trustify, GUAC, et cetera, to help the LF begin to answer questions of, oh my gosh, the next log4j came out, and this time it impacts Go. It's some sort of, like, let's say, open telemetry library for Go that, oh my gosh, it's a 10 CVE, et cetera. what would it take to, like, what projects underneath the LF are impacted? How do we make sure that everybody, let's say, who is impacted gets in the same room? Or not everybody, but at least the majority of folks where this is a serious situation gets in the same room, because it would be real nice to solve it, have, like, as opposed to 50 different projects, each solving it different ways, maybe the 50 projects can come together and figure out 1, 2, or 3 ways that work for everybody. And kind of approach it that way. So that's kind of where I think our group can help solve some of those issues as well.
So it is solving the communication and coordination.
Yep.
Okay.
Regarding to the SBOMs and the quality of SBOMs, we had some chat last week, basically related to the issue that the James were working on regarding, like, SBOMs can be spec compliant, but they might not be good enough semantically, right, for an organization. So how can we do this and maybe first start creating some kind of, like, okay, maybe a kind of a verifier for the quality of SBOM, but then maybe at some point include it as like to the plugin mechanism in the Trustify, that when you try to ingest, you have policies that you can implement to say, we are only accepting these SBOMs when they are have the certain fields. So this minimum CISA stuff looks good for, like, a default plugin to say, like, okay, this SBOM, yes, it's a valid SPDX, but it doesn't have enough information to be usable, and then to allow other organizations to pitch in and to define things that are interesting to them. We talked with one big organization that doing something similar on their own. They use dependency track, and they're building their own plugins because they have a lot of suppliers that are now obligated to send SBOMs, and as you can imagine, they are trying to cut corners and just send random things. So they're trying to do that, to protect themselves from being, like, bombarded with poor SBOMs. So
yeah, we looked at this for a bit. I think there's a huge spectrum of, like, SBOM quality that we can look at, right? Like, the first one, like you say, spec conformance, and then the other one is like, okay, are the fields there, and we've done. So I shared the library that we actually got Ada Logics to help us write this, and then we added stuff to it. It's supposed to be like the NTI compliance, and then we made some modifications to it as well based on chatting with the SPDX spec folks. This is just SPDX. We also ran on all the SBOMs that we generate, and all I have to say is, like, meeting an NTI minimum elements requirements is not the most feasible thing, and I think in some areas also doesn't make the most sense. Some of the things don't have suppliers difficult to get for some of those things, and so it's, like, very difficult to meet 100%. This SBOM is 100% NTI compliant. One of the things that we've also thought about SBOM quality is, so for us, what we've been thinking about as, like, the low hanging fruit is to look at the tools, right? So I think we look at the tools, we look at where the SBOM is being generated, and we kind of have a good sense. We also are talking about this thing called, like, full file system accountability. So anything that has analysis SBOM that looks at file system, we will log every single binary. So this is something that Scalable, the open source tool, will do, right? It will And Ceph also can do this if you configure it in a certain way. It will write down like, here are all the binaries, all applications based on the headers that was scanned in this file system. And then each of them will have a set of packages that they're related to. And so we can measure basically like, oh, look, there's this application, there's this ELF that isn't accounted for, there's no packages related to this. So we suspect that there's something wrong with it. And then at a certain point, it's like, oh, if you have full transitivity and you trust every SFORM that like you have provenance for everything that was built and all the way to the source, and then you have a SFORM for every single build step on the way, then that's like the super high quality SFORM. But that's not feasible for most things. Yeah, SFORM scorecard is also another good one. It also has like a bunch of checks that that happened in this SFORM component suite that we did. One of the one, I think if your question is why did we write a new library for this, one of it is we wanted Go support, and it's hard for Google to rely on other open source libraries. And so if you look at this S1 conformance library in the Go mod file, it is a very small set of dependencies. Yeah.
Along those same lines, at some point, I would like to kind of give another demo on the current stuff I've done for. It's like related in the sense of how can we get stuff a little bit more simplified, but on that mole thing, one of the ones was because I think you brought that up of like, hey, I created a sort of a local version of OSV that can run, and again, because it's run all sort of potentially, you can run it in process or via IPC or whatever. It's because internally I think we hit OSV a lot and we get rate limited a whole lot. So it's like, hey, however many hundreds of so sometimes when we have something like, hey, we need to hit OSV with like 500,000 pearls, that can end up taking a couple of hours of for it to come back with all the stuff. The local version takes about 30 seconds, maybe a little less than 30 seconds to sort of come back, and that's also just running on my laptop. I think that there's some stuff we should. I think you brought up anyway. The point I'm trying to make actually is, I think you brought up a good point there, Brendan, about like actually there's a lot of stuff that we could probably, in the very least, if we're not the ones working on it, we should highlight some of these issues around how can we get better SBOM quality, because Trustify and GUAC are only going to be as good as the SBOMs that come in. Obviously, we can enrich the data with deps.dev, OSV, with other things, but obviously, if there's better data to start with, it makes a lot of the analysis that are happening in these other tools a little bit just generally better, and you have to do less hoops of like, now let me try and reach out to other databases to see, did they include all the dependencies that we thought they did? Do we have to go and look up from deps.dev to see that actually they missed some stuff? Things like that.
Yeah, we're actually running into, I think, data quality overall, whether you have SBOMs or data vulnerability databases or anything, it's just like a very hairy problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had a lot of stuff where like we have missing packages, or like the packages gets duplicated, and then we end up with some weird results here and there. Yeah, I think that'll be a good discussion when we discuss the small RC.